Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, of course, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, of course, wouldn't you know it, it's Phil Mackenzie. Phil, what's going on? This is living inside a couch cushion. We're in the cushion now of the UFC schedule.
It's been made for a purpose, and yeah, that's where we are.
Your theory was that, and it's with no other evidence, it seems like a very strong theory, was that the UFC front-loaded the year for fear that another COVID-like, business inconvenience would arise and would force them to cancel some shows. And so what seems to have happened is we had an absolutely relentless run through the first 8 months of the year. And now that we're through September, we have a week off next week. We have a week off in November. We have 3 or 4 weeks off between the middle of December and the middle of January. This is it. They didn't need all this cushion, but the cushion is still there, and now they don't have enough fights to fill it. So we're here. We're going to have the last few months of this year, 2022, are going to give us lots of opportunities for topics and things that aren't the UFC, which would be kind of nice. But also, I'm scared. Phil, will you comfort me, please?
Yeah, what will we do without our corporate overlords here to feed us things to talk about?
UFC is my daddy.
Please, we need content to turn into more content.
Please, daddy, is what Phil is trying to say.
Yeah. But yeah, I think so. The UFC is, I think the number is 42. I think if they don't put on 42 events per year, they're in contractual breach to ESPN. And yeah, I think during COVID they missed like 4 or 5, and then they suddenly had to really try and cram the rest of the year into a very short time span. And yeah, it's literally, hundreds of millions of dollars or however much it is at stake. And obviously, my personal opinion, is that they've chosen to make sure that doesn't happen again. So they have, gaps in the schedule here which they can fill in case something goes wrong. They have gaps in the schedule towards the end of the year in case things get cancelled early on.
Well, I will say, who knows? Maybe they will need the cushion, because I just counted 42 events in 2022 exactly, including the ones that are still yet to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, who knows? Maybe they'll have to do an emergency event.
But as long as they hit 42, that's fine. So they've got, and they've got gaps to put it into.
Mm-hmm.
But it gives us some time to, digest events that we might not necessarily look at in any great detail, but also talk about other stuff like Bellator or just general things that we see in the sport.
Mm-hmm. Or movies and TV, which is what we just spent the last hour talking about.
Mm-hmm. You were saying how terrible spin-offs are, and how Better Call Saul was so much worse than Breaking Bad. That's so awesome.
That is so close to what I really was saying. Good job, Phil.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, honestly, your nearest miss yet. We've got a UFC event in the rearview mirror that we're going to be talking about today. Mackenzie Dern versus Jan Shaonon. I actually found it to be quite an interesting event, almost from top to bottom, actually. I quite enjoyed it. And there's plenty to say about it. I think we're also going to try to touch on last weekend's Bellator event. The great Patricio Pitbull staged yet another in a long, long line of title defenses against Adam Boritz. And some other things happened there as well. Aaron Pico's arm flew off, from what I'm hearing. And then, sort of related to Aaron Pico and other things that have been in the news, Bo Nickal, and many other examples of this that we've seen in the UFC over the years, we are going to spend segment 3 talking about prospects, the concept of being a prospect. How do you develop a prospect? Are organizations like the UFC or even lesser organizations like Bellator, are they capable of actually developing prospects, or does that have to happen on regional circuits? And how soon is too soon to sign a Bo Nickal to the UFC? So that's what we're going to talk about in segment 3 after getting through all of last weekend's fights. Why don't we start with Dern versus Jan?
This was, I think, one of the only ways in which this could be a competitive fight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was it was really one of those fights where the styles were so defined, and we've talked a bit about this before, where like style clashes don't lend themselves to competitive fights because either one person's game or the works or the other person's does. And this was basically, I think, one of those fights which is just an encapsulation of that. Like, I guess, let's say like Rory McDonald versus Damian Maia.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it's really just one of those fights where one person is really winning in one phase, and then the other person is really winning in the other.
Mm-hmm. A true outcome fight, as we guessed.
Yeah,
and I'm not praising us for guessing
got both of those outcomes, I guess.
Yeah. And to her credit, I mean, we ultimately ended our talk about what Jan Shaonon might do to be competitive. We ended it by saying she's going to have to get lucky on several occasions or fight perfectly. And as long as you're willing to stretch the definition of perfect, she did both. She got lucky when it was on the ground. Not entirely. I mean, she did a good job defensively. I think we're continuing to see like fight-specific improvements from Jan Shaonon, that she is coming in looking to build on her recent failures. And but also, you know, she grappled with Mackenzie Dern. She's not Tisha Torres. She had to be a little lucky to survive those moments. There was certainly at least one point right at the end of a round where it looked like she was about to get armbarred. And thank God there were only 8 seconds left on the clock when that attack began. But then on the feet, she looked sloppier than she usually does. I think it was obvious that worrying about the takedown had an effect on her specific techniques, but strategically, she actually did fight pretty perfectly. She fought a great fight on the feet. She did exactly what she needed to do. So, again, we saw both fights, and both win conditions for Jan Shaonon to win either of those fights were present. So it was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and also, like, I think it was a draw.
Yeah. I think a draw would have been very fair. One judge did have it a draw.
I think they were right.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. I was okay with Jan Shaonon winning, just because I know that usually you either win a round or you lose it. 10-8s are a rarity, but a draw would have been perfect, in my opinion.
I think I have heard that, I don't know how much this is a myth. Well, this is a real like, kind of making stuff up about UFC strategy kind of episode already. That Dana White has specifically told the commissions that he wants less 10-8s
because it leads to draws.
Yeah,
that sucks.
I know, it's awful.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I have no reason to say that that's true, but it doesn't sound far-fetched to suppose that an organization as powerful and lucrative as the UFC would have significant sway in just telling the universally corrupt athletic commissions how they want the fight scored.
Mm-hmm.
I would believe that happily with a little concrete evidence, and even without it, I suppose it might be true. Whatever the case,
exactly my kind of my thoughts on the matter.
Yeah. But yeah, a draw.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those ones where it was like such a two true outcome fight that you basically ended up with long stretches of Jan, if not dominance, then just clear winning on the feet. Dern is still gritty enough that she was able to force through a few occasions and land a few strikes. And
God, she's a mess on the feet, though.
Like so bad. And then, yeah, once it hit the ground, once, I think, because Shaonon tried to escape from a grounded position and then just got her leg taken.
Yeah.
And the second time, was that... I mean, did Dern actually land any takedowns in this fight?
She did hit a hip toss of a sort on a few occasions, and then Jan basically figured out how to stop that. It still worked like 3 times, but it also put Jan in a position where she could like keep her underhook and just scramble back up to a clinch, where she did quite well, because Mackenzie Dern's wrestling is basically as bad as her striking, if not worse, because it should be so much better. The curse of the jiu-jitsu fighter. And then the takedown in round 5, I think it was like an arm
weird kind of whizzer into an arm drag.
It was I think what Daniel Cormier would call an arm spin, but might be called like uchenage or something, which I've absolutely just gotten wrong. But there's a judo term for that as well. But yeah, an arm spin. You take the arm over your shoulder, and it's like a different kind of hip toss, basically. A 2-on-1 hip toss, let's call it. So yeah, that was basically it. It was the only takedown any women who don't know how to wrestle ever get in MMA. It was hip toss, head and arm throw type shit.
That was another one of our conditions, is that Dern will win this if she tries to win.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is that she looks she's still super gritty. She's coming in fantastic shape, like visibly, compared to how she did in her early UFC career.
Yeah.
And I mean, just look at that like brief little library of takedowns that we just listed.
Yeah.
Every one of those ones is some of them aren't takedowns, but every way that she got it to the ground just was a kind of in the moment weird thing.
Yeah.
It was a way of kind of maximizing that the fight, we said Shaonon had to fight perfectly. It was just a way of maximizing that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
But, if it happens, it happens, and then I'll get it, and then I'll finish her. All I have to do is be like gritty and physically competitive and in shape, and then it will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it did. Like, to be honest, like I said, she should have. I think she should have gotten a draw. She could have even won the fight, because honestly, you could potentially give her a 10-8 in round 2.
Yeah,
I don't think you should.
No, I don't think so either. And it wasn't. It was the fact. It was really the fact that there was the duration, one of the 3Ds in round 5. That takedown happened in the first minute, and then the rest.
In round 2, it was she had. It was the fact that most of the grounded positions she had on Shaonon were from the bottom. She was trying for submissions,
right?
And Jan was desperately defending in round 2, so it's a bit hazy when it comes to like 10-8 scoring. But she certainly had all the offense in that round.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's just you can't just be wild and opportunistic. You have to have some. You have to have some way of building to your A game.
Like philosophically, a draw is fine, right? Or rather, a win for Jan Shaonon is fine. If somebody won this fight, it can't be Mackenzie Dern. Her style doesn't make any fucking sense. She hasn't gotten better at the things she needs to get better at. Like, the striking doesn't even have to be better than this. Learn to wrestle, for fuck's sake. Learn to wrestle and look for it. Pressure the opponent. Take them down and get on top of them. That's how you're going to win. You're a grappler. And she hasn't done it. So, like, yeah, just like creating chaos and getting 2 rounds where, yes, you're winning and possibly enough to get a draw, or even if you want to call round 2, certainly Dern's rounds are more 10-8, both of them, than any round Jan Shaonon won.
Mm-hmm.
You could, in some universe, very far from this one, give Mackenzie Dern a win based on 2 10-8 rounds.
Yeah, exactly.
But, like, what's going to happen if she wins this and goes on fights gets a title shot or something? No, she clearly still needs more time. Her style is the same that it has been basically the entire time she's been in the UFC. So yeah, philosophically, I'm perfectly cool with the Jan Shaonon win. She has improved more over these last 3 fights than Mackenzie Dern has in her entire UFC career.
Yes, I mean, I think they said that Jan has been training at Alpha Male. She'd essentially been wrestling the whole time, and had just been wrestling and grappling the whole time, as far as I'm aware, which allowed her to survive Dern's terrible takedowns, and also probably allowed her to survive on the floor as well, and allowed her to reverse Dern in the last seconds of round 5 to throw a tiny bit of offense, which is possibly what saved her from getting 10-8'd.
Right, and then just getting a draw after all that effort. Yeah, I mean, she looked good for all of that. Like, we knew that she was going to get essentially smoked on the ground, and it didn't lead to an instant loss, which is a win already. And then strategically, she fought a very good fight. She did all that she's capable of doing to avoid those situations as often as possible, and racked up shots and won exchanges with Mackenzie Dern more and more as the fight went on, and poked at her and kept her chasing and made her look clumsy and silly on the feet. So, yeah. I, for one, am perfectly happy with the Jan Shaonon win, although I do agree with you that by the rules, a draw would have been the most correct scorecard, yes. So anyway, enough about scoring and everything. Let's spend just at least a few minutes talking about some of the specific things that these fighters did to have this fight play out the way it did. And we've already kind of talked at length about Mackenzie Dern. She's just a bad striker. Like, she's just really bad on the feet. I think there's a bit of Ben Askren-ness there. Like, she just feels very unnatural doing it. But also, like, what the fuck? Why isn't she getting any better? She's got Jason Perillo in her corner. He's a good striking coach. What's happening? Her boxing hasn't changed at all. She's worse than Ronda Rousey at boxing. What the hell? Ronda Rousey showed signs of improvement in her striking. Mackenzie Dern she hit a ceiling ages ago. She barely uses her jab. She overthrows so consistently that she spins around at least 5 times in every fight, provided she spends enough time on the feet to get there. She just throws herself off balance, and her chin just flies up in the air every time she punches. Mechanically, she has not gotten better, and that is a concern for me. I was glad, by the way, I think on the Vivi with Zane, that I pointed out how good Jan Shaonon's left hook looked against Marina Rodriguez, because she almost knocked Dern out with that left hook in one of their exchanges. I mean, I say almost knocked her out, but she hurt her badly. I mean, Mackenzie Dern was one of those things where she got hit, and you watch it in slow-mo, and this is always a sign that someone is hurt to me. You watch it in slow-mo, and the person, they get hit, they clearly don't see it coming, and then their expression changes to one of, like, almost sadness. You know what I mean? Somebody suddenly becomes concerned, and you can just see it in their body language in their face, where watching the fight live before the replay, Dern ate that shot. She tried to recover. She tried to stay aggressive. And then, like, she tried that for 4 seconds to just hide that she was hurt, and then changed her mind because she had to accept that she was hurt, and she started backing off and trying to get her legs back under her. And that was when Jan realized how badly she'd actually hurt Dern, because Dern herself couldn't convince herself to keep the mask on, basically. And this was because, again, Jan Shaonon clearly did spend all her time working on her striking and grappling, and was obsessed with not losing that way, because her striking looked mechanically much worse, much sloppier. But she landed those counters because Dern's striking is far, far worse than Jan's ever could be. She's just a mess, especially in the pocket. And she has to be in the pocket because she only knows how to fling herself forward with all her weight. So I don't know. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think right at the beginning of the fight, you could see Dern like thinking about, trying to be a better striker. I think just for like a few minutes, and then she just. I mean, it's what we said before is that people can learn layers, but they're normally pretty thin and they can get peeled away. I think they just got peeled away super fast.
Yeah, it's Leonard Garcia starting a dozen fights on his tippy toes, and then just being Leonard Garcia after 3 minutes and getting hit a few times.
Yeah, I mean, you just what is Mackenzie Dern's punch? Like,
no,
what does she build off? What does she use as her like primary weapon on the feet? Because you can tell that she's been told that she should jab, but it's just something that she sticks out there.
Yep. I mean, I guess it's the right hand. That's clearly what she wants to land. But it's not good. So I don't know. Is it a case of it's just impossible? I don't know. But if you're Mackenzie Dern at this point, it's an indictment on something in your training situation that you're going out there and you're still like thinking about, actively, visibly thinking about how to be better at striking. Because like, aren't you doing drills? Isn't this shit getting hardwired into you? Whether you want to think about it or not, shouldn't I be seeing your mechanics improving? I mean, I know it's a tall order to get better at something, especially when you specialized in something else for your entire athletic career. But like the mechanics have not gotten better to any extent that they persist once anything unexpected happens.
No, I think that is a bit of a flaw in the training philosophy of Mackenzie Dern, because like you said, it should have, she should have just watched a whole bunch of Damian Maia tape.
Yeah. Style-specific improvements would be great. I'm jabbing my way into takedowns. Why has her wrestling not gotten any better? Aren't you fucking training wrestling? Why are you so bad at it? Again, I know you're a jiu-jitsu person. This is the curse of the BJJ fighter.
It feels kind of less acceptable, right?
Yeah.
Because there's lots of people who are just not good at striking. Ben Askren, or to an extent, Phil Davis.
It's a whole new universe, and it might require completely different talents than what made you a good grappler or wrestler. Yeah, but wrestling and grappling are linked. Literally, yes. Both require you to be linked to the opponent. There's a commonality there that makes them different from striking. You should be getting better at wrestling.
Yeah, so I mean, you would think that she strikes because she enjoys striking, but she doesn't look like she enjoys striking.
Yeah.
It makes it a very sort of bizarre quest. It makes it a very bizarre thing. Like, normally people get, I guess George Gurgel was the historical, classic example of this, as someone who just wanted to bang.
Yeah.
She doesn't even particularly look like she wants to bang once she's in striking exchanges.
Yeah.
It's a puzzling one. But yeah, I think Shaonon just managed to have enough painstakingly earned grappling chops. Again, something she improved on, but is in no ways actually good at, to survive. Managed to hurt Dern with that left hook, and I think maybe a knee. And
she landed lots of good jabs.
Was mostly running the Marina Rodriguez game plan.
Yeah.
Am I particularly enthralled by the idea of Jan fighting for a belt? No. I'd be pretty shocked if she could beat anyone at the top of the division. But
she's earned it more than Dern. She went in there and had a good game plan that, philosophically should work. There were good ideas. That has to be rewarded somehow. And Dern hasn't had any good ideas. So fuck her title.
I think she's settling into what is basically the Karolina Kowalkiewicz position in the division right now. Not Dern. I mean Jan.
Yeah, that's
she's
a great comparison.
and exploitable, and like if you're a title challenger, you should beat her.
Mm-hmm. She doesn't look that athletic, but then you tie up with her and you're like, oh, she's actually pretty strong, and she's got a lot of good basic skills, and she can adapt to a variety of opponents. Yeah, Kovacevic is a great comparison. So yeah, I'm happy to see this performance from Jan. I did think she looked good, and she didn't go up in flames when she had to grapple Dern. She did successfully thwart a lot of admittedly very bad takedowns, much worse than the ones Carla Esparza got her with, but still, we saw some better wrestling instincts when she was getting tied up with. And ones which, as she settled into the fight, kind of improved. I mean, rounds 2 through 3, or rounds 3 and 4 were a very good improvement on the first flub in round 2. And yeah, she used her jab. She kept her feet moving. She separated clinches on her own terms. I thought she looked very solid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like Jan Shaonon. I like styles that make sense. And hers makes sense. It is also funny, and perhaps the natural evolution, that Team Alpha Male is now becoming a hub for all the Asian fighters.
Yeah.
It's like...
it's been going on for a little bit, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, they've got Song Yadong there. It's like we're the gym where all the little guys go.
It does make sense.
Where do all the best fighters in smaller weight classes come from in boxing? It's like South America and Asia. All the best little athletes are there.
I think who was their first guy like that? Was it?
I think it was Tanaka or Michinori. Was that the name?
He fight in. That was Teruto Ishihara is the one that I remember.
Oh, well, they also had Michinori Tanaka.
Oh, yeah.
Who was a very alpha male style fighter.
Yeah.
But, yeah, he trained there while he was in the UFC, at least. I'm not sure if he's there now, but I know they were in his corner.
Good for them. You can't accuse Uriah Faber of not being a man who understands, how to make investments.
Yeah, yeah. And, yeah, for all its faults, Alpha Male is a reliably successful gym. They've got good wrestling training, good wrestling sparring partners at the very least. Everyone always has great conditioning, and they've got good steroids. Okay, let's take a break. Everyone knows that by now. Let's take a break. When we come back, I think we'll try to touch on a couple other fights from this UFC card. We'll talk about Patricio Pitbull, and then we're going to talk about prospects, of which I guess Mackenzie Dern is one in her own right. Another example of a hot prospect, not a double entendre, who comes to the UFC and either they flame out or they sort of just start to smolder for the rest of their career, as it seems Dern is doing. So we're going to talk about all of that after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're into the smorgasbordy section of the show. We're going to start off, I suppose, with our UFC co-main event. Then maybe let's talk about Patricio, and then we'll dip back into the UFC card for anything else. And we can save anything we have to say about Aaron Pico's latest performance, I think, for our segment 3 on prospect development. So, Trinaldo, Randy Brown. We, again, no high praise for nailing any sort of broad predictions, I don't think, on this card. The only thing that prevented this from being a really solid Fight Night card, other than the fact that the main event was, slightly meh, was, as we said, the fact that many of these fights were at best half interesting. They were pretty straightforward in one way or another. Either one guy was bound to win, or you kind of get the dynamic off the jump. And all that being said, we definitely nailed what this fight would look like.
Yep.
Although,
and it's nice to come at a approximately correct conclusion to for how a fight looks, and it's not your initial read on the fight, because you really feel like you've learned something when you thought about how it's going to turn out. Because I think both of us came into this and we were like, Randy Brown's 9 feet tall.
Yeah, poor Trinaldo.
Trinaldo is pretty short. He's going to get melted. Yancy Medeiros kind of fucked him up. No reason to assume why an older Trinaldo is not going to have a similar fight with, or no reason to assume why he can't get pushed out by a sort of more dynamic and physically intact fighter like Randy Brown, and even
bigger, exactly, yeah.
But then, we both looked at it and we were like, oh, this is going to be weird.
Yep.
And it was weird.
It was.
And we picked different people to win, I think, and it was super close.
Yeah. I don't even remember who I picked. Did I pick?
I think you picked Brown and I picked Trinaldo.
Okay, right. Yeah, and honestly, fair enough.
In our inversion of you loving the old people and me liking the younger, more athletically gifted ones.
Well, I love Trinaldo. I just, and I wouldn't even say
sadness hedging a bit.
I wouldn't even say I fully sadness hedged. I was just like, all those factors you already named. Here's an even bigger guy. The output, in fact, was the main thing, because that's how Trinaldo's been losing. You can hurt him, but that rarely, taking the fight to Trinaldo, and this did end up being a bit of a concern for Randy Brown, taking a fight to Trinaldo and trying to innovate too much, trying to build too much, can be the crucial mistake. Because Trinaldo fights back like a motherfucker. He's super tough. He's mentally unbreakable. He's just incredibly resilient and will try to adapt and will get more aggressive if he has to. And that happened. The real effect that turn had on this fight, though, which I didn't fully appreciate, was he effectively sucked Randy Brown into his pace. Randy Brown's output, which was one of the main factors, in addition to all the other ones, his size and his dynamism and et cetera, main reasons that I picked him here, I did not expect the extent to which Trinaldo would be able to put on pressure and land enough counters to drag Randy Brown into a fight that's far too slow for Randy Brown to win.
Yeah, and also to win the third round.
Yeah. It was he made it weird in a Trinaldo way, such that I don't think it would have been insane to give Trinaldo this fight.
Oh no, I mean it was very contentious.
Yeah, round 2 was a swing round.
It's a pretty clear Randy Brown round 1, partially because he lands a big knockdown.
Yep.
He also he eats his own fair share of shots, but there's no way he's winning that. He's not winning that round.
Right.
It's a super contentious round 2. And then round 3, it's just Randy Brown hanging out in Trinaldo's guard.
Yep.
Sorry. Holding his guard whilst Trinaldo is on top of him mostly.
Yep.
Yeah, you know what this made me think? I mean, one of the things that made me think is that Trinaldo is, I think, perhaps one of those people who simply doesn't get mentally tired.
Right.
There is no mental aspect to the fatigue that he has that so many other fighters have.
Right.
I don't think you can overload him and get him weary in that way. But just by thinking about stuff that he will overreact and that he will second guess and tire himself out. I do not think Francisco Trinaldo is like that. I think you can tire him out if you have a head-to-head challenging of his cardio, and you are a very good cardio fighter.
Right.
Looking to kind of drain him mentally, That just doesn't seem to be like the way to go. It's not possible. Like you can outwill him. You can Michael Chiesa back in the day, or several other fights have been able to just go head to head with him and wear him down physically.
Yeah.
But mentally, just don't think like you can flash a jab in his face and then go for 3 or 4 different follow-ups like Randy Brown did. And he's not going to tire himself out like trying to figure out what's happening. He will just keep thinking the entire time.
This is why Trinaldo reads as being more durable than he physically is, because it is actually kind of funny. I looked at this right now. Fights in which Trinaldo gets knocked down. He got knocked down by Jai Herbert, won that fight. He I don't know. There's many throughout his career where he has been knocked down. I think he got knocked down by Medeiros. No, he didn't actually. He just ended up in an insane brawl after almost killing Medeiros for 8 minutes. No, he did. He did get knocked down by Medeiros. Somehow, impossibly, he didn't knock down Medeiros once, according to the stats. That feels wrong. That's got to be
100%. He was 100% just being held up by the fence.
Okay, but even in my memory, it's like he had to have gone down or touched a glove to the canvas or something, right? Maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like it's 50-50 basically on if Trinaldo gets knocked down, if that means he's going to win or lose. It is not the defining factor. Can you hurt Trinaldo? Because yeah, he's going to get hurt, but yeah, if anything, it makes him more focused and more involved in the fight. Again, he's so resilient mentally. Yeah, which is also a reason why he's just like, we'll just stolidly have like 15-minute snooze fests where like he doesn't break. He doesn't, if that's the kind of fight you're having, he's engaged the whole time and it's just dead even the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, what this reminded me of actually was another fight where I was like, oh yeah, this guy's probably just going to push Trinaldo out of the fight with his length and volume and so on. And then at the end, I was just like, have I just misread Francisco Trinaldo? James Vick.
Yeah.
And admittedly, James Vick won that fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Randy Brown technically won this one. But yeah, I mean, the dynamics of it is that you were, like, here's the pace fighter, here's the pace and length fighter. Maybe Trinaldo, the explosive puncher and the big single hitter is going to get to him early, but eventually he's going to get worn down. The actual dynamics of that fight were Vic picking him off with his length early, and then Trinaldo getting used to it and basically spending the last round just chasing him around the cage, beating him up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you look at the numbers, I mean, Randy Brown, here's some other recent fights that have either not been dominated by grappling or ended quickly. 93 strikes landed, 115 strikes landed, 89 against Brian Barberena. Probably still his best, most comprehensive win. And here he landed 60 to Trinaldo's 40. Those are not Randy Brown decision-winning numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying he didn't win the decision. It's fine that he did, but yeah, those are just not the numbers that you usually see when Randy Brown has won a decision in which he spent most of the fight on his feet. So, all in all, I found actually a very good performance from Trinaldo. I don't know what the guy's deal is. He just doesn't age the way other people do. And yeah, his mental resilience, his focus, his determination to win, combined with the fact that he has for a long time just been a super meat and potatoes, like I do the stuff that works kind of fighter. Lands good counters, has respectable defense, knows how to pressure, knows how to move evasively, hits the body, and works in takedowns when it's strategically reasonable to do so. Like, he's just a very solid fighter who is extremely tough in the head. Yeah. Honestly, a win for
great
Trinaldo.
Performance from him.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the kind that will not do him any favors.
Yeah. But yeah.
He lost, and B, it was typically, Randy Brown is a little bit of an action fighter, but it's one of as he said, it's one of Randy Brown's more unmemorable performances.
Yeah, although I still found it quite compelling, but yeah, it wasn't.
Oh yeah, but that's the thing. It's a real it's a real professional performance from Trinaldo, but the UFC isn't in the business of rewarding professionalism.
Exactly. It was an RDA ass kind of win, and the UFC doesn't give a shit about fighters like that. But I consider this a win for Francisco Trinaldo because he legitimately made it a 50-50 fight.
I agree.
When it should have been more difficult. Okay, let's talk about Patricio. Pitbull versus Boritz. It feels like this phase of Patricio's career, I mean, this is his whole career, is like, you see fights like this, it smacks of, and this is a bit hypocritical of me to even critique him for it, because I just did on our Patreon a commentary of Aldo versus Faber. And the fifth round of that fight is like the first instance of a dynamic that would define many moments of Aldo's championship career, where he just kind of realizes he's won and stops really trying to put a stamp on it. And I defended Aldo for that. You know, I'm like, is it fair to critique him, or can you look at this fifth round and many others like it? The fifth round against Dominic, the fifth round against Lamas, other examples as well. Many of the rounds against Florian. Can you point to that and be like, what the fuck? Isn't this guy a champ? Shouldn't he be trying to make a statement here? And is that a fair criticism? Yes. Which is why I'm going to criticize Patricio for it to an extent. But I also said in the commentary, well, he won the fight. Like, what are you going to do? He just keeps winning. And that's Patricio. And unfortunately, happening on a stage where, like, just I'm obliged to spend less of my focus on. I've just basically cornered myself into a career where I just talk about every UFC event. And there is also legitimately a slightly lesser extent of, or a lesser level of competition for Patricio. Like, Adam Boritz is a very good fighter, but he essentially got here at least half because he fought a version of Mads Burnell who didn't look in particular, an inconsistent fighter who had, I think, a bit of an off night fighting him. It's not Patricio's fault that I don't really care about Boritz as a challenger. It shouldn't be a mark against him that he won the fight, you know, soundly but sort of unimpressively, unexcitingly. And yet, he's not Jose Aldo, and that is a little bit how I feel. Like, great, you won. You countered the things you needed to counter. It was an absolutely dreadfully slow pace, and nothing really very exciting happened for 5 rounds. What makes it impressive is that it's one of 10,000 performances like that Patricio has staged, and he's clearly has been for a long time one of the very best featherweights in the world. But
I mean, so it makes sense that we're seeing some. It makes sense that this is the fight that we're talking about after we talked about Francisco Trinaldo, and we mentioned, that is a professional performance.
Yes.
This is a professional performance.
Absolutely.
Patricio is a consummate professional at this point. And I think that the disappointment is, I think, in him being trapped in Bellator, is that we're not seeing him fight other sort of... we're not seeing him able to fight people who can compete with him on craft.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is there's people that are younger, that are more dynamic, that are often, bigger.
Mm-hmm.
But his era of sort of fighting his peers has gone, because by the time his peers come to Bellator, they are generally shot.
Yeah.
In one way, shape, or form. They're rarely coming there in their prime. So Bellator is now, to its credit, it's trying to build up its prospects and its own, homemade stars as it has in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But this just means that he's fighting a steady stream of people who could be classed as slightly raw.
Mm-hmm.
Even AJ McKee.
Yeah, absolutely.
And AJ McKee is 100%, a less coherent, experienced fighter than Patricio Pitbull.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it would be great to see him fight. fight. As I said, the people from his people who can compete with him from his era or around it in the UFC. Fight some of the really experienced, like dangerous guys in the UFC. If he could come to the UFC, he could fight say a Cub Swanson or an Andre Fili, and then go from that into a fight with like Max Holloway.
Sure.
That's the kind of stuff you would love to see.
Yeah.
But for the moment, it is him. He is the professional in Bellator, and it's still remarkable that he's doing this.
Oh yeah.
I've mentioned before, I'm not the biggest fan of the way that he's sort of slowed his offense down in this last sort of leg of his championship level career.
Mm-hmm.
For the people that he's fighting, it is perfect, because I said they're typically slightly raw and slightly unfinished and prone to making mistakes that he can capitalize on.
Yep. And just not experienced enough or confident enough to not just sort of be frozen out, which is what he essentially did to Boritz. I mean, he pressured him with footwork and feints, but essentially just spent the entire fight saying, "No, you."
Mm-hmm.
And then punished Boritz when he made a rash decision, which he did. He tried, Boritz is a flying knee guy, but that was frequently his big gamble when he was put in this just Mexican standoff kind of fight with Pitbull. And Pitbull just expertly did what you do to flying knees that have not been set up or established with any kind of pressure or any. There's no reason to think you're going to get a panicked reaction out of Pitbull, which is when a flying knee typically works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, shit, we saw one on the UFC card. Joaquin Silva got a flying knee because he had an opponent who kept flinching and ducking because he wasn't sure what was coming. That shit just doesn't work in a Patricio Pitbull fight, and not against Patricio Pitbull. And it didn't. He countered one with the 2-punch combination, which didn't really land, but did put Boritz on his back. He countered another one with just a takedown, just grabbed the flying knee and put him on his ass. And otherwise, Boritz was just really, really reticent. He had a really hard time getting anything going. And yeah, I would love to see Pitbull fight. At this point, he's still top 5. He's got to be better than Chan Sung Jung is still clinging to a tie for 6th place in the UFC featherweight division. You tell me you wouldn't expect Pitbull to go in there and have an exciting fight that he wins against Chan Sung Jung? I think he would, absolutely.
Yep.
You put him in there. He could beat Arnold Allen. He could beat Josh Emmett, Brian Ortega. He could win any one of these fights. I would probably pick him in most of them.
Yeah.
It's not his fault, and he wants them, It's just a shame. I want to see. This is the last few fights we're likely going to get out of Patricio Pitbull right now. It's got to come to an end at some point, and it's just a shame that you don't get to see him pitted against these other complete fighters.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen him come back and reclaim his belt.
Yeah.
After he lost it to McKee, but it's just a matter of how much longer can he keep doing stuff like that? And
yeah.
The answer is probably not very long. And
it wasn't as awesome as the last time he lost and then regained his belt and those incredible fights with Daniel Strauss.
Yeah.
So,
it's a shame that you get to see that kind of Aldo level of will. Just of never giving up. And it's just, trapped in Bellator. You don't get to see it on the biggest stage.
Yep. Yep. It is what it is. Congratulations to Patricio. I do love the guy. Even if I don't love these recent fights, they're not fun, but it's not entirely his fault. And he had so many amazing fun fights in his career. You're right. When he was coming up with his peers, holy shit, those fights with Pat Curran. The fights with Daniel Strauss.
Yeah, and he's one of these guys where, like I've said many times before, when people were saying that Eddie Alvarez, when he just joined the UFC, and they were like, who's this guy with his boring ass fights against Anthony Pettis and Gil Melendez and so on. style's just like Eddie Alvarez has paid his dues.
Yeah.
Patricio has paid his dues.
Yeah.
Like, he can have as many boring fights as he wants at this point.
He's earned it. It doesn't mean I'm going to enjoy them, but he's certainly earned it.
I'm not going to love his style. I might not love the fights, but damn it, he's earned the right to have them.
This guy made his pro debut 18 and a half years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck?
Yep.
All right. So, last notes then on the Dern-Jan card. All I want to say is really just a recommendation more than anything else. We didn't talk about this one in the lead-up. Though Zane and I are both big fans of John Castaneda. We've really enjoyed his UFC fights. And he's another guy who's been really, like our kind of guy, a professional. Wins because he's good at strategizing. He's got a good process. He's got a nice, well-rounded game. He's a little, Bilal Muhammad for his division, that kind of fighter. And he had a fight with a guy that Zane really likes, Daniel Santos, who just got styled on by Julio Arce in his UFC debut. No shame in that. Julio Arce is another consummate professional and at this point very experienced. And it was probably the best, most complete fight I've ever seen out of Arce to beat Santos. But he and Castaneda had an absolute war where Castaneda seemed to think he was going to outslick Santos and sort of did for the better part of the entire first round. He had a southpaw switch-up threat that he was using. Lead left hand. He's got this little darting left hand and left high kick. And he got 3, well, actually not knockdowns, but 3 as good as knockdowns. 3 moments where he badly, badly hurt Santos, one of which was a knockdown, in that single first round. 2 high kicks that he kept getting Santos in trying to slip the left hand. He kept getting him to duck into. And then 1 straight left hand that was just like a perfectly timed boop, and Santos didn't even realize what happened. He just got flash knocked down. And but Castaneda broke under the pressure, and Santos, to his immense credit, refused to go away, even after getting essentially knocked out on his feet with the 3rd moment in that first round, the 3rd high kick, on incredibly weak legs. Got hit with a huge left hook in the follow-up sequence as Castaneda was trying to flurry him out of the fight, somehow stayed up, and the moment Castaneda ate a counter and decided to remeasure himself, Santos was right back to pressuring him. And landed some brutal body shots, used some really nice kicks to the legs, to the body especially. It was body shots and pressure from Santos. And Castaneda couldn't put combinations together. He was just a little too ragged, and in part I think he was just exhausted from trying to finish Santos in the first round, but also it was just a little game planning miss or just an inherent weakness of Castaneda's that he's not enough of a combination puncher, and he had some really good tricky ideas, but he couldn't build on them. A switch up is not enough at a certain point. You have to, at some point, the opponent is going to catch on to or just be able to survive that switch up. And you got to have some other connective tissue. And what Castaneda really, really needed in this fight was a fucking jab and a right hook to come after his left hand. He needed just the ability to extend exchanges in which he was clearly hitting and hurting Santos all the while. But Santos was the one extending the exchanges. Santos was the one pressuring. I thought Castaneda would win because he would have to respond to Santos' pressure with his own. That was where he failed. He could not back Santos up, except for when he was hurt. And then he stopped being able to hurt him and couldn't create any other opportunities with combinations. So, incredible fight, though. I mean, 8 minutes of just brutal violence with a huge momentum swing right smack in the middle. kind of broke my heart to see Castaneda have all that success and then lose. But now that I'm removed from it, like, you just have to give huge credit to Daniel Santos for that performance. He's a chute box fighter, and it was a very chute box fight.
You can really see him trying to be Charles Oliveira at points. Like,
he trains with Charles Oliveira.
Yeah. I mean, you can see who he's been inspired by, right? With the yellow split shorts and the blonde hair and the like there's moments where he just looks like a mirror.
Yeah.
He throws a combination like from a left, starts with the left hook and then just like digs into the body, and it really looks a lot like Oliveira.
Yeah.
It's mostly a very sort of knockoff version. That's even.
Wow.
Yeah, like Castaneda has very odd, had some really odd body language at the end of two of the rounds. I don't know whether it's because he's hurt or because he's very tired.
He's tired, and the pressure is he's just been anxious the entire fight, basically, I think.
Because he at times he just drops his hands, like he can't raise them anymore.
Yeah.
And just like tries to back out of the pocket with his hands by his waist.
Yep.
Which either he's incredibly exhausted, or it's just a very strange defensive reaction from when he's badly hurt.
Yeah, I think Santos gets credit for that. He put immense pressure. I mean, it was the same shit he tried against Arce, but Castaneda is not as classy a striker as Arce, and that was his downfall, that he could not stop Santos pressuring him, and he didn't figure out either beforehand or during the fight that his only way to survive that would be to make Santos back up. Would be to step in and extend exchanges, and just by will and violence stand his ground and refuse to be backed up. He couldn't handle that. So, Santos somehow, despite getting smashed at 3 distinct points, he broke Castaneda's will, which is incredibly impressive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's a short little knockoff Chucky Olives, and you could be worse things than that.
Yep.
Probably he'll end up being more like their another one of their teammates, Thomas Almeida. Probably this shit doesn't fly that long at bantamweight, but hey, it's fun. Okay, let's take one more break. When we come back, prospects. After this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about prospects, their development. When is too soon to sign a fighter? What prompted this idea for you, Phil, was the idea to talk about this was all the recent discussion of Bo Nickal, who just got a UFC contract. They signed another guy recently, too. Another guy of the Enrique Barzola mold, where he's 17 years old, but he looks like he's 35. Who was that?
I'm not sure.
They signed a 17-year-old.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. That sounds horrific. I can't remember what his name is.
Yeah. Okay.
Just remember, the number jumping out at me.
Yeah, I'll find that as we talk about it. Clearly, neither of us watches every single Contender Series the card.
I think Raul Rosas Jr. However you pronounce that.
That sounds right. Yeah, Raul. So, yeah, but what prompted this topic was Bo Nickal getting signed off his second Contender Series fight. And I guess that's the most the UFC can do for prospects is, well, how about you fight twice on the Contender Series before we sign you?
Yeah. I mean, alternatively, the person could just be like, I want to fight in the Contender Series, and you could be like, no. But
yeah,
are they going to do that? Don't think they will.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be a great use of a format like the Contender Series. Build up a character, you know, and then get a crossover when they get to the UFC. Like, treat this like a spin-off TV series where, yeah, it's a feeder league. And why not give a guy like 5 fights on the Contender Series before you sign him? Maybe they are headed in that direction. But whatever the case, Bo Nickal is 3-0. He's been fighting for how long? A year, if that.
Less as a pro, he had his debut in June.
Yeah.
So he has been fighting for what? 5 months.
Yeah. Having been an incredibly successful and decorated collegiate wrestler, and now he's in the UFC for real. And so, your question essentially is that good?
Yeah. So, I think when this happened in when they said this that Bo Nickal had been signed, I made a sort of slightly facetious post on Twitter where I said, I hope they don't rush this guy too soon. Wouldn't want to see him fighting seasoned title contender types like Alex Pereira too soon into his MMA career, which is obviously because Pereira is how many fights into his UFC career?
Like 7 or 8.
Sorry, his MMA career, like 7.
Yeah, something like that.
But this is not the same thing. No. I'm not going to say it's because of the kickboxing or anything like that. It's because those 7 fights for Pereira have been spread out over like 7 years.
Yeah, he's a guy who's been dipping his toes into MMA for the past decade of his kickboxing career.
Yeah, and
which Adesanya did as well, as I think did other city kickboxing guy, Brad Riddell. I think he also had
and Holly Holm.
Yeah, it's pretty common actually that when kickboxers do successfully make the transition, it's because they spend a lot of time being basically pro MMA hobbyists and training.
Yeah, and that makes sense because you develop those skills, in the gym. You don't develop them in the fights.
Absolutely.
What the fight is, what people need experience from actual fighting is obviously stuff that you can get from your other career, which is,
pressure,
the round system and the pressure and the, just knowing how to recover when you're stunned and you're under pressure and all this other kind of stuff.
What a training camp feels like, which is not the same as just getting work in the gym. Is a training camp is its own thing you have to get used to. Weight cutting, these things, yeah.
This, I think, is where kickboxing has a small leg up on like wrestling as a base. It doesn't have many. I think wrestling is obviously largely superior, but kickboxing allows you to prepare for the same essential, stressful, competitive experience that you're going to get in an MMA cage. Like, just the way it's announced, the rounds, it's all going to feel relatively familiar to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it is just about building the skills. But as I said, Pereira, 7 years. Bo Nickal has been training in MMA, I think, since 2019, and has been a pro for as we said, like 5 months.
Yeah.
I mean, 6 if you count, a bit more if you count his training. And I couldn't help but think of this when we had a look at Aaron Pico over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Because Aaron Pico was someone who was considered to be, an incredible super prospect. He was, I think he got second in the U.S. Olympic team trials for wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
He was like super young, clearly incredibly athletic, really loved the sport, and like had obvious like ancillary skills to go with it. Like if I had to look at Aaron Pico and Bo Nickal side by side, and you said, which one of these guys is a better prospect? And, this is before they had any kind of, take them at the same moment, before they've gone into any kind of pro MMA career. I probably would have said Pico.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's not as good a wrestler as Bo Nickal, because very few people are. Bo Nickal has some insane array of accolades, above even that of, Pico placing to get onto the U.S. Olympic team. But Pico, as I said, he trained boxing. He had incredible hand speed. He could, he already looked like a comfortable striker very early on in his MMA career, or at least if not a comfortable striker, then a committed and extremely dangerous one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the mix of skills which Aaron Pico brought to the table was incredible for someone at his age. And then he got put into a second tier, high-level competitive environment. Not even the UFC, but Bellator. And he lost his first pro fight, and has since then been okay, but hasn't really taken any major steps up in competition. And those ones which he's lost, which were to Henry Corrales, Adam Boritz, who we just talked about, and recently, and perhaps the most concerningly, to Jeremy Kennedy, where his, I believe, either his shoulder dislocated or his clavicle got broken, but I think it was his shoulder got dislocated.
Judging by the amount of tugging he allowed his corner to do on his arm to try to pop it back in, it wasn't a broken clavicle. It was... There can't have been a broken bone. I don't care how much adrenaline you have coursing through your body. Even getting your shoulder yanked on while it's dislocated is incredibly painful. I don't think he could have borne that if he had a broken bone. It looks like a shoulder dislocation. It looks just like Korean Zombie's shoulder did when he fought Jose Aldo.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that little gap between the shoulder bone and the rest of the arm, the little pointiness that shouldn't be there. So yeah. Dislocated shoulder. And, Jeremy Kennedy's not a bad fighter. But, and it's not like there's something incredibly reproducible about this result. But it is the kind of shit that happens when you're...
But it's also the kind of thing where, injuries beget other injuries.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's a famous thing which happens to professional sports people in general. You compensate, you overtrain, it just keeps coming back. It's like, the first hole being torn in a piece of paper, makes it more likely that you can tear it from some other angle.
Right.
And it's a genuinely concerning thing to look at if Aaron Pico is suddenly picking up injuries like that at the age of 26, because there's a solid chance that that's just never going to go away.
Yeah.
And he's currently 5 years into his pro career, I think.
Mm-hmm. He's not yet hit what should be his prime based on the usual math. And yet he's already picking up the post-prime, late-prime injuries.
Yeah, which means that you could get a Chris Weidman type or Cain Velasquez type injury flameout, but, potentially without even hitting the heights.
Right.
And like I said, that is one of the reasons to be concerned with Bo Nickal, is that he sounds incredibly confident that he's just on his way to get a belt. People have said, I think he'd be a favorite against, all but three. He'd be a betting favorite against all but three people in the UFC, in the UFC's middleweight division. But he looks as good. Honestly, he looks good in his. He looks good in the very limited amount of footage you can see of him fighting.
Yeah,
he's obviously a very good wrestler, but he also has a tremendous grasp of how to change positions and work for jiu-jitsu positions.
Mm-hmm.
As we see, he immediately took the back and choked out his last opponent. And he's a willing striker who can throw straight punches, which is all that you can ask from him at this point in terms of being on the feet.
Yeah. Clearly hits hard enough. I mean, he's obviously a great athlete.
Mm-hmm.
That helps. He also, he hasn't actually fought anyone yet.
No.
And I mean that both in the sense that, while these are not wins that you should just ignore, I mean, these are themselves prospects, obviously not on the level of Nickal, but he's been fighting prospects. That's perfectly reasonable. But both in the sense that they are not experienced fighters, and in the sense that, sort of because of that, these not too meaningful wins have not actually forced him to have to prove that he can fight, as in fight back, as in, I mean, you first talked about doing this segment, and you're like, yeah, Bo Nickal, he's won in these 2 fights, and he's won 3 fights, and I don't think he's been hit once. And my first thought is not, wow, how impressive. My first thought is, what happens when he gets hit once?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know yet. So yeah, we were talking about all the other prospects we've seen go through the UFC, and this sort of idea that an organization like the UFC, or even a somewhat comparable one, like even places like Bellator, where they're obviously much more willing to give softball matchups, but they've got a roster full of good fighters. And a guy like Aaron Pico isn't going to get many softballs. At some point, he's going to have to fight a journeyman. He's going to have to fight a veteran.
I mean, quickly.
Quickly, yeah. He was doing it almost right away.
Yeah, I mean, if he's winning fights, again, I would imagine, and if they're like this, he's going to be, a lot of the time it is going to be a style matchup thing. He's going to fight people who don't have an answer for his wrestling. He's just going to wipe them out.
Right.
People are going to be clamoring for him to have a title shot. The UFC is going to be thrilled to throw him in there. And he himself is obviously like, no, I'm going straight for the belt as fast as possible.
Yeah, these organizations aren't designed to keep fighters in stasis which is essentially what these prospects need. That's why you fight a bunch of, not even cans, but just like people on your level, or a well-curated selection of older fighters that have certain weaknesses or whatever. This is why fighters' careers should be managed that way, because, as you said at the top of this segment, what they really need is time. It's not the fights, it's the time. The time spent training and getting better. That is how you develop from a prospect to a contender. And organizations like the UFC are not designed to do that, and nor should they be. I mean, I think the question is not, should the UFC start... Even I'm going against things I've said in the past, but this just struck me. Like, the question shouldn't be, shouldn't the UFC be coddling their Sage Northcutts and Macy Barbers and Bo Nickals? It really should be, they shouldn't have those fighters. The UFC should be where the complete fighters go. Right? Like, that's what feeder leagues are for. That's what regional circuits are for, is to develop prospects into being fighters who are ready for promotions like PFL or Bellator or ONE or Ryzen or the UFC. Because I don't want the UFC to get into the business of, as much as I've critiqued them for just like burning through guys like Mike Perry in the past, that is essentially like thinking all the challengers who fought Ronda Rousey and thought they had to work on their armbar defense. If you're defending the armbar, it's too late. You made a critical error long ago that has put you in this position. I don't want to see the UFC give a guy like Bo Nickal 10 easy layups. That's not, like at a certain point, that is not.
At least in part because they would probably have to hire. They'll probably have to hire.
They would have
people specifically to be that level of layup,
which they have done here and there a little bit. I don't want to see it, honestly. I'd rather. And this is not a situation where I have a good solution, because I'd rather see them not sign guys like Bo Nickal, but obviously there is a corporate competitive aspect to this, where they don't want the other organizations to lock these guys in first. And so there's an incentive for them to get them, but then like they can't and shouldn't do anything but ruin them. Like that's what they're designed to do. The UFC is designed, it's a trial by fire. And
it's not, it's not really a trial, is it? It's not a testing ground. It is
exactly.
It's where you go when you are done being tested.
Ideally,
that is,
the UFC should be the last stage of the conveyor belt to each division's respective title.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the divisions are supposed to function, is, a relatively small, densely packed field where everyone there is trying to get to the title. And obviously, not everyone in every division, the vast majority of them, have no realistic hopes of getting to the title, but they're in there as part of that, habitat, which is designed to produce not, it's designed to produce title challengers and champions. And it's just too soon. I don't care how confident Bo Nickal is. It's not the first time I've heard. It's far from the first time I've heard one of these young people who get signed by a big promotion talk about winning their title shot. The question is, because Macy Barber talked that way, and Sage Northcutt didn't. He's too nice, but Cody Garbrandt talked that way when he got signed. He's another guy that flamed out despite reaching incredible heights. He's like a Cain Velasquez kind of story. The only ones who've succeeded are Jon Jones, and I guess more recently, and it's yet to be proven if this is a long-term success story or not, Khamzat Chimaev.
Mm-hmm.
And it's is Bo Nickal, for this to be a good idea, you have to think Bo Nickal's better than Khamzat Chimaev, because he's yet to even demonstrate the totality of skills Khamzat has.
Yeah, because there have been, it could just be that the UFC is putting him on. I mean, the best thing would be the UFC is putting him under contract, and then they're just going to hold him for a while. But actually, we know that's not true because he's got a fight booked. He's booked against Jamie Pickett, I believe. But yeah, there are examples of successful prospects in the UFC who got to the UFC without having very many fights, and we're going to discount Brock Lesnar because
it doesn't count. Heavyweight, other reasons.
Yeah, it was heavyweight, and it was mid 2000s heavyweight.
Yeah.
There weren't very many people in the division, and they weren't very good.
And also, he barely did it. He instantly lost, and then his one title defense was sort of getting completely crushed by Shane Carwin and just not dying fast enough. So
he defended against what's his face? Defended against Mir as well, didn't he?
Oh right, but that was the guy that he lost to in their first fight.
Yeah.
So again,
so. Let's talk about some successful prospects in the UFC or at this level of competition, let's say. So, Jon Jones, he got to the UFC pretty much a year after he started competing as a pro.
Yeah.
I think he is the closest comparison that we get to Bo Nickal. Apart from the fact that he was much younger, he had 6 fights, and his first fight was on April 12, 2008, and then he fought Andre Guzmão in August 2008. So, I mean, that's actually, 4 months.
Yeah.
Which is completely insane.
It is.
He is the gold standard for MMA prospects.
Yep, who somehow, against all odds, survive and improve because of the UFC's trial by fire format. And even then, looking at Jon Jones' early UFC career, they all the matchups are quite reasonable. They're not easy.
Yeah,
it's still
two
astounding,
things.
But yeah, go on.
I think there's 2 things. One is that he started having competitive fights quite soon, like Carlos Eduardo and so on. And yeah, that he was he quickly proved that he was incredibly durable and so on. And two is the other thing is that if you look at those fights, his early fights, he looks kind of like shit.
He does, yeah.
Obviously full of physical potential, but he also just looks like a giraffe learning how to fight.
Yeah. The Guzmão fight is not impressive, really. I mean, it is, but it doesn't look good.
And then he just suddenly, took a leap forward after the Guzmão fight to look tons better against Stephan Bonner, but then also gassed out in the 3rd round.
Mm-hmm.
Then looked better against Jake O'Brien, and then just started absolutely torching people.
Yeah.
And looking like one of the most, horrifying forces we'd ever seen in the UFC.
Mm-hmm. Which he is and was.
Yep. So he is, I think, he is the proof that it can be done. And one of the things that you need to do one of the things I think you need to do is probably or at least to some extent, is that you need to be in one of the heavier weight divisions because the people there aren't as good.
Yeah. So Bo Nickal's, and they're not as skilled. Bo Nickal's right on the cusp. He's in the last little division, but also the first big division. It's both sides. It's right in the middle. It's middleweight.
It is, yeah, and it is. I mean, this is the curse and the blessing for him is that this is the division, as Alex Pereira has proven, where you just need to have like one really good skill in order to get right to the top, and you just need to get a few good matchups, and then you're off.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Jon Jones has proven that you can do it in those timescales at the big boy divisions. Other people who have come close or who have been raised in high-tier MMA promotions pretty much.
Well, the other biggest success story is Max Holloway.
Yes, Max Holloway. How long did he... So he had his...
He had four pro fights.
Four pro fights, and it was about 16 months between his pro debut and his UFC debut against Dustin Poirier, no less.
And he got smoked.
Yeah, as you would expect.
Yeah. He had some nice moments on the feet for like a minute, and Dustin Poirier's like, I'm going to take this dude down, and he just destroyed him.
Yeah. Dustin Poirier was a relatively well-schooled, MMA... I think he was still a prospect, but he'd fought quite a lot in Louisiana.
Max's is almost the most impressive of all these stories to me. More so than Jon Jones, more so than Khamzat, who has himself, a rare dominance in his run so far, but also a few, real gimme fights at the very beginning, and then the story is still ongoing, so it's hard to say. I mean, Khamzat might be a massive failure, or he might be... More typically, these guys either flame out right away, they get reduced instantly to action fighters who stick around but never get better, or they do have their rise, like Brock or Cody Garbrandt, and then they're gone forever.
Or Chris Weidman.
Or Weidman.
Who got into the UFC, I think, under 2 years into his pro MMA career.
Yeah, and they're these incredible talents, and they rise really quickly, and then they're just struggling for the rest of their career, or they're just gone. Max's is the most impressive, honestly, because Poirier is a brutal first UFC fight. He gets one arguable gimme against Pat Schilling, and then he's fighting reasonably good fighters. Like, I know Leonard Garcia as a punchline. I sort of used him as a punchline when we were talking about Dern Jan, but that's a tough, seasoned opponent to be fighting in your 8th pro fight. And then he's fighting Dennis Bermudez right after that, a fight that he won, although he lost the split, but if you watch it, I think it's pretty clear he wins that fight. And then it's Conor McGregor right after that. The first 6 fights of his UFC career, half of them are like title contender or future champion level fighters. And then he just wins like a billion fights in a row and wins the title after that. But it's so unusual.
It was honestly, that Bermudez fight.
Yeah.
Was the one where I was like, I'm never picking against this guy again.
Yeah.
I'm never picking against Max Holloway. If he can do that, if he can be a dangerous... if he can be an incredibly dangerous striker, who's clearly got, cardio and a fighter's mind and is just gritty and dangerous and
skilled. I mean, the guy was showing great boxing.
He can just learn takedown defense between fights. And if he's making those kind of leaps, I was like, I'm picking him over everyone. I think the next time I picked against him was in the Volkanovski rematch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably how it was for me too. I probably picked Conor McGregor over him, but yeah. The point is these are incredibly rare success stories. There are far, far more examples of honestly. I mean, it almost helped Max Holloway that like he wasn't even hyped. No one gave a shit when Max Holloway made his debut. He wasn't even in the Jon Jones position. So even though he got incredibly tough matchups, it was almost like there was no pressure. It was just his own drive to get better.
Because he was. I mean, we've spoke on this many times before. Max Holloway's position was to be the action fighter that people got fed to make them look good.
Yeah. And then
Justin Lawrence was expected to blow him out of the water.
Yeah. And then he beat Andre Fili.
Yep.
He beat Cub Swanson. Like, yeah, there's a sense that none of this was intended to happen. There are far more examples of Sage Northcutt, Macy Barber. Mike Perry was like 6 or 7-0 when he got to the UFC. Lando Venata, an inexperienced fighter, when he got to the UFC, instantly fought Tony Ferguson. Didn't work out for him. Never got better, basically. That's far more common, is some kind of either drawn out or instant failure. And then of the ones who do succeed, they tend to succeed for a short time and then they flame out.
Yeah. And I think even more than that, there's just the fact that I think within the first 2 years of their career, almost everyone just doesn't. They just don't look good.
Yeah.
Like, alone within 1 year of your MMA career, it is simply not possible for you to be anything close to a finished product at that point.
Yeah.
And it can do weird, scary things to people's confidence, but also to their like physicality when they get into when they get into trouble. You pick up injuries, you pick up concussions, you pick up. We saw like Song Yadong, for example. We talked to him before about someone who has all the pieces of an incredible prospect. And is, he's almost certain to title contend. But then he had that fight with Corey Sandhagen. And apparently one of the reasons why the second half of it was so tough for him was because Corey Sandhagen broke his orbital in the second round. I mean, it is dangerous stuff. And the people who have overcome it are few and far between. I will say, because I mentioned this one before we started recording, Petr Yan, I think, is one of the freakier examples.
Yeah.
In that he fought and arguably beat Magomedov 15 months into his MMA career. And if you watch that fight, like, I don't think you can. I mean, you can watch Jon Jones 15 months into his MMA career. You can watch Max Holloway 15 months into his MMA career. You watch anyone.
They don't look that good.
They don't, like, Petr Yan looks like a very good MMA fighter 15 months in.
Yeah.
He is a goddamn freak.
Yeah. And then he rematches Magomedov like a year later and beats him soundly.
Yeah.
Yeah. These guys do exist, but it's because it's so unlikely that it's so impressive, which is not to say that Bo Nickal isn't at least as good or better than someone like Khamzat Chimaev. But, it's just worth keeping in mind that, like, functionally, this is not what organizations like the UFC more than any other, is not designed for these kinds of fighters to do well. It's an accident when they do well. And it almost seems that the more pressure and expectation placed on fighters at the beginning, the more people actually expect them to do well, the quicker they flame out. Because again, Max Holloway and Petr Yan are the best examples. Petr Yan, by the way, was a finished product when he did get to the UFC, or at least very close to it. I mean, arguably, he's such a freak. He was a finished product 2 years into his career. But, it's like Max Holloway is the biggest success story of all these guys, and then no one gave a shit about Max Holloway. All the ones that people expect to be that look like freak prospects from the jump, the pressure might be a part of what gets to them, and all this expectation. It's a huge weight to carry when, I mean, that is a thing, again, that having a ton of fights actually does make a massively substantive difference. Usually it's time and training that makes you a better fighter, but to deal with being a high-level fighter in front of a crowd, fighting for a belt, doing all the interviews, everything, that is helped by just the experience of having had a number of fights. And the quicker you get into that, the less likely it is that that you're going to be suited to it. So we'll see.
It is also. I'm going to say one more thing, but okay. I also think it. I've again, this is a point I might have made before, and I'm going to reiterate it. It might be notable that the burnouts that we saw, they tend to be wrestlers. And because it's a style which allows you to win fights, as we've seen. Without getting hit, you can control the phase and where it takes place, and you can just pick up dominant. You can just pick up dominant wins without the other guy getting off against you, basically. But it involves picking people up and putting them down, and it makes wrestlers incredibly injury prone.
Yeah.
So Peter Yan and Max Holloway, and eventually Jon Jones, really.
Mm-hmm.
None of them came from like a competitive wrestling background, which apart from Jon Jones with JUCO rather than anything more anything as vicious as like D1 or NCAA wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
These guys either didn't come from wrestling backgrounds or didn't have particularly or like developed as strikers. If you think of your Chris Weidmans, your Cain Velasquez's, and these were people who came in and did incredibly well and then suddenly disintegrated.
Yeah.
So it is. I've said it about Khamzat that I am concerned just because he trained so incredibly hard that I do worry that he's going to, and due to how his style works, I do worry that he's going to just pick up like bad career injuries like early into his career.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is another reason to be concerned about Nickal. Simultaneously, he will have dominant fights when he wins, but A, this will leave him untested in other areas, and B, just think like it's very difficult to have a primarily wrestling-based style and have career longevity.
True. Yeah, that's a great point to wrap up on. Very interesting discussion. I suppose we will see where Bo Nickal winds up. All right, I have no idea what we're going to do next week on Heavy Hands, but, I guess there will be a card coming up for us to preview, so we will at least spend part of it talking about, I believe it is Grasso versus Araujo. So we'll be talking about that, taking a look at that undercard, probably mixing another topic in there, if not covering some boxing or another MMA promotion. And until then, thank you all so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this week's show. Make sure you find Phil for more of his wonderful insights on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson. Find me at Boxing Bush. And until next week, just before we go, there are some shows like Aldo fight commentaries up on the Patreon. So if you like those me blathering on over fights, you can find them there. It's $3 a month. Thank you for your support. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.